Okay, so ready to dig into a career path most people probably haven't thought much about.
Yeah, hit me.
Let's talk wax bleaching.
Wax bleaching.
And no, before you think we're heading to a salon, um, we're talking candles here, folks.
Okay, got it.
We've got this really cool platform, RoleCatcher. It's like a deep dive into different jobs, and they have a ton on wax bleachers.
Interesting. I mean, it's not the first thing you think of when you hear career.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So to start, let's get something straight. When we say wax bleacher, what are we actually talking about here?
Well, this is where it gets kind of cool. You'd think it's simple, but a wax bleacher is key in candle making. Like the color of the candle, how well it burns, even the scent throw, it all comes down to how well that wax is bleached.
Seriously.
It's that important.
Oh, yeah. They run these things called filter presses and tanks, and it's all about getting that wax pure, clean, the perfect base for whatever's coming next.
Huh. So there's actually some serious skill involved. Oh, tons. Raw wax, whether it's soy, beeswax, anything, it usually has impurities, natural colors, stuff you don't want in a candle. The wax bleacher gets rid of all that. They're like the guardians of good candle wax, basically.
That's pretty cool. So what makes someone good at this? What does it take to be a wax bleacher?
Well, you gotta have an eye for detail, that's for sure. It's precise work, but it's also pretty technical. You're working with machinery, chemicals, often on a tight schedule, so you need to know what you're doing.
So it's a good mix of hands-on and like brain power too.
Exactly. And here's the thing that surprised me when I was looking at RoleCatcher. They emphasize social skills as being really important.
Really? Social skills. When you're like elbow deep in wax all day.
Right. But think about it. You're still part of a team, right? You got to
It's
communicate with your supervisor, other operators, maybe even the quality control folks. Being a team player, being able to take direction, it matters just as much as the technical stuff.
it's like any job, I guess. You got to play nice with others. Okay, let's talk about the ups and downs. RoleCatcher mentions there's potential for moving up, which we'll get to. But what are some other good things about being a wax bleacher?
Honestly, for people who like to see the results of their work, this is it. You're taking raw materials and turning them into something that people love, that brings light and fragrance into their homes. There's got to be a lot of satisfaction in that.
Yeah, that makes sense. But it can't all be sunshine and scented candles, right? What's the downside?
Well, it can be physically demanding. You're on your feet a lot, might be lifting heavy stuff, and it can get hot. Plus, you're working with chemicals, so safety is a big deal. RoleCatcher talks a lot about the safety protocols and gear involved.
So, not a job for everyone, that's for sure. You got to be okay with that environment.
Definitely.
Okay, let's talk career path. Where does being a wax bleacher lead?
So, according to RoleCatcher, it's a pretty clear path. You usually start as an entry-level wax bleacher. You're helping out with the basics, monitoring, cleaning, doing quality checks. Think of it as like your wax apprenticeship.
I like that. Getting your hands dirty, literally learning the ropes. What's next?
Next up, junior wax bleacher. Now you're doing more on your own, operating the equipment, fixing small problems, maybe even training new hires. You're not just learning anymore, you're starting to lead a bit.
Okay, gaining some confidence, sharing that expertise, and then,
Then you become the wax guru, senior wax bleacher. You might be leading a small team now, figuring out ways to improve things, handling more complicated maintenance stuff. It's about really understanding how to make that bleaching process the best it can be.
wow, from apprentice to master, but it doesn't stop there.
Nope. The top of the candle ladder, according to RoleCatcher, is wax bleaching supervisor. You're running the whole show. Procedures, production, the whole shebang. You're like the conductor of the candle factory.
That's quite the journey. RoleCatcher also has these things called example profiles. What are those about?
This is where it gets really interesting. Instead of just saying what the job duties are, they make these profiles of people fictional but realistic at each stage of the career. It's like getting a glimpse into their work life.
So you can see what those responsibilities actually look like in action.
Exactly. Like they've got one for an entry-level wax bleacher, and they talk about learning to do quality checks and how important their attention to detail is. If they miss something, it could mean a whole batch of candles is ruined. It's those little things that make it real.
Yeah, that's way more interesting than just a bullet point list.
Yeah,
Do they have those profiles for all the career levels?
they do, and you can see how it changes. The junior wax bleacher talks about solving a problem with a piece of equipment. The senior one figured out a way to save the company money by optimizing a process. And the supervisor It's all about leadership and working with other departments.
It's amazing, right? You actually get a feel for what it's like to do the job.
It's a really cool way to learn about a career.
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked about the skills and all that, but why is this whole bleaching thing so important in the first place? Like, what's the big deal with getting that wax so clean?
Well, it all comes back to the candle, right? Raw wax, whether it's from soy, bees, whatever, it's often got stuff in it that you don't want in your candle. Impurities, weird colors, things that can make it burn unevenly or even mess with the scent.
Ah, so it's like taking something that's already kind of cool and making it amazing.
Exactly. Bleaching gets rid of all that gunk, leaving you with a wax that's either perfectly white or beautifully clear, ready for whatever comes next. Color, fragrance, the whole 9 yards.
Makes sense. A blank canvas for the candle makers.
Mm-hmm.
So someone who's really good at this wax bleaching, they're super important to the whole process.
100%. They're like the quality control right from the start. If the wax isn't bleached right, the whole candle suffers. How it burns, how the color looks, everything. It's a subtle thing, but it makes a huge difference.
Wow, who knew there was so much to it? Okay, there was this other section in RoleCatcher that I wanted to ask you about. Alternative titles. What's that all about?
Yeah, that's actually pretty important. Job titles can be all over the place, you know. One company might call it Wax Bleacher, another might say Filter Press Operator, or even something totally different like Wax Treatment Technician. It can get confusing.
So if you're looking for a job like this, you can't just search for wax bleacher and call it a day.
Exactly. You got to look beyond the exact title. Focus on the core skills, the responsibilities we talked about. Those are what really matter.
That's a great tip. Okay, before we move on to interviews, any other interesting tidbits about the job itself that our listeners should know? Like anything that surprised you when you were digging through RoleCatcher?
You know, it's kind of cool. The sheer variety of waxes out there. Paraffin wax is what most people think of, but there's soy wax, beeswax, even palm wax. And they all have different qualities, things a wax bleacher needs to be aware of.
It's a whole world of wax. You're not just good with machines. You got to be like a wax expert too.
Totally. Knowing how to handle each type of wax, how to adjust the bleaching process to get it just right, that's all part of the job. It's a real mix of science and experience.
Fascinating. Speaking of experience, let's talk interviews. RoleCatcher had some interesting examples of what kind of questions they might ask you.
They did, and some of them were kind of curveballs. Like one was, how do you ensure the wax bleaching process is safe? They're not just looking for a list of rules. They want to see that you get how important safety is, especially when you're working with chemicals and all.
Of course. Safety first, always.
Yeah.
Any other, unexpected questions they might throw at you?
This one seems simple, but it really makes you think. Can you explain the difference between hard wax and soft wax? Sounds kind of obvious, but it shows you understand the materials, what you're working with.
Yeah, it's those little things that show you really know your stuff. What about those hypothetical situations, those what-if questions that interviewers love?
Oh yeah, RoleCatcher had some good ones. One was, what would you do if the bleached wax wasn't reaching the desired clarity? They're trying to see how you solve problems, how you think on your feet.
It's like being a detective, figuring out what went wrong and how to fix it.
Totally. And that ties back to what we were saying about the different waxes. A good wax bleacher can diagnose those issues, make adjustments based on what they know.
It's a whole skill set. Okay, before we get to the AI stuff, anything else crucial about landing that wax bleacher gig?
One more thing, networking. It's huge in any field, but especially this one. Going to industry events, talking to people online, even reaching out to candle companies directly, it can make all the difference.
Putting yourself out there, making those connections. Always good advice. All right, let's switch gears a bit and talk about how AI is changing the job hunt, especially for something like becoming a wax bleacher. RoleCatcher seems to be right on top of this trend. So AI, right?
Yeah.
It's everywhere. But for someone who's actually thinking about, hey, maybe I want to be a wax bleacher, what's the practical side of that? How can these AI tools like this RoleCatcher thing actually help them get a job?
It's wild, right? Think of it like this. What if you had a career coach who'd analyze thousands of job descriptions, specifically for wax bleachers? That's what RoleCatcher's AI does. It figures out exactly what employers want, what skills they're looking for.
So you're not just shooting in the dark, hoping your resume hits the mark.
Nope. Their AI helps you tailor everything, your resume, your cover letter, so you're highlighting the stuff that matters most for this kind of job. It takes the guesswork out of it.
That's incredibly helpful. But that's not all RoleCatcher's AI can do, is it?
Oh, there's more. Their interview practice tool is where it gets really cool. You record yourself answering typical interview questions, and their AI analyzes it, like gives you feedback on how you're doing.
Whoa, seriously? Like having a personal coach right there on your computer.
Pretty much. It tells you about your delivery, what you're saying, even your body language.
Just amazing. Are there other ways AI can help with the job hunt? Like for our aspiring wax bleachers out there.
Networking's another big one. RoleCatcher actually uses AI to connect you with people in the candle making industry.
It's like what do they call it? A digital matchmaker, but for your career.
Exactly. It's pretty cool.
Sounds like AI is changing everything about how we find jobs, especially for these niche fields.
For sure. And it's not just about making things automated. It's about giving people the tools they need to find work they'll love. A wax bleacher might not be for everyone, but for the right person, it could be the perfect fit.
I love that. Well, we've covered a ton in this deep dive, everything from what a wax bleacher actually is to how AI is changing the game. For anyone listening who's thinking about this kind of career, what's the one thing you want them to remember?
Honestly, don't underestimate how much skill and artistry goes into making a great candle. And behind every one of those candles, there's a wax bleacher making sure that foundation is perfect.
Beautifully said. So if you're someone who loves details, who's curious about how things are made, if you ever look at a candle and wonder how they do that, well, maybe being a wax bleacher is your thing. Dive in, learn more. You might be surprised where it takes you. That's it for this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, stay curious.